Hi everybody, welcome to our lecture for Chapter 14, which is Team Leadership. One of the things that I found to be pretty interesting about this chapter is really, it kind of goes over the historical contents of what a team is, what a team looks like, and what essentially how that relates to education and business as well. If you're considering this for your final project or for your dissertation, I would strongly encourage you to look over this and try to make a little bit of sense of it. So, we're going to talk about all of the historical perspectives on team leadership, kind of the human relation movements, group dynamics, how the leaders' role in a group exists, organizational development and effectiveness. My areas right here, this is really where my work has started. This stuff I've kind of kept out of because my stuff really isn't teaming oriented. And then obviously the benchmarking movement on how we hold people accountable. And then we have kind of this competitive advantage, how technology can enable teams, and then how it increases productivity. When you have me for a later class, you're going to see the most of my work is right here in this organizational development and how teams are formed, because I still think that in order for a team to work, it all comes down to the effectiveness of the team leader. If the team leader is the one that doesn't have a clue, then the rest of the team doesn't function appropriately. That's always been my experience with it. So, all of this stuff is common sense. If a lot of this stuff we've talked about in other chapters, but it's really now applied to teams, which I think is important to note. But I believe that somebody ultimately has to be the leader and the ultimate decision maker. You get into problems in education when you don't have one person who everything falls back on that is the ultimate decision maker. Schools fall to one person, and you understand the model. That's why I am so fascinated by the dynamics of the team leader versus the dynamics of the team. I get that people think otherwise, and I've heard argument after argument at conferences that, no, it's about this group synergy and the whole 1 + 1 = 3 movement, but that's not me, that's not a belief of mine. I think we're in a profession of education where everything ultimately does fall back to one person, so you have to understand that, and that person has to choose their team effectively. That's why when I'm looking at teaming, I'm looking at team structure. You think whatever you will, it's cool with me. That's kind of my approach to it. So when we look at team leadership, we look at cognitive processes, effective roles, behavior roles, and viability of teams. My question when I look at this stuff is really, how do you measure this quantitatively? How do you measure how effective a team is versus how ineffective a team is? Can I, if I have a group of 5, can I put an idiot in with the group of 5 and substitute out somebody that's a high performer, and can I measure what the idiot adds to the team? Team leadership isn't really studied quantitatively because of this, because there really isn't this natural parallel that comes with it. What we can look at when we're looking at teams is cool. We can look at how the leader interacts with the team. Does the leader have an in-group or an out-group that they favor more? And that relates kind of to the LMX theory we've been talking about the entire class. How do teams develop capabilities? What does the leader do? Once again, my big takeaway message, the leader really makes the team. And what does distributed leadership look like as well? So you measure this qualitatively. I don't see any other way to really look at this function. So the end result of all team interaction should be increased effectiveness, increased performance, increased development. You have to make sure that there's a clear agenda, that things are supported appropriately, and I think that can be measured based on productivity. But I also think it has to do with the measurement of who your leader is. Because if you're doing professional learning communities and somebody's not coming around and reeling in and saying, well, this person has to do this and that person has to do that, you're never going to get anywhere with the whole professional learning community model. That is, in my opinion, professional learning communities are a flawed model unless you have the right teachers trained and the right principals trained. If you have the right teachers trained and the right principals trained, there's nothing like professional learning communities. I think they're one of the biggest high-impact initiatives in all of education. But if the principal's not trained appropriately, you are wasting your time with professional learning communities. When we're looking at, really the decision, do you monitor or take action? I think you monitor. A good leader monitors, but they monitor by doing things like drop-bys. They jump in, they say, is there anything I can do to help? They walk around, they're visible, they're active. when you monitor, you don't have to monitor their work, but you have to monitor their engagement. I think that's a big idea, and I think that's important as well. So when you have, when you have to intervene, sometimes you have to determine when the right time is to intervene, and you have to make decisions as to if you can get away with something or you can't get away with intervening. I have found in my looking at team leadership, you have to have a delicate balance. You have to give people the autonomy to make choices, but if you know that a choice that they make is going to be awful and you're just going to have to go back and fix it anyway, that's really when you step in, and that's when you make the changes when you need to. So you have to understand the difference between an internal leadership function of teaming and an external function of leadership teaming. The internal ones are when people disagree that are in groups together. When there are times when when tasks aren't being accomplished or completed because there are conflicts, and when there are external challenges, really when the organization doesn't have proper support through various resources as well. So when we're looking at the different actions, when we're looking at the internal ones, it's really task relational, and our external ones are environmental. The task ones really are ones that you should be able to monitor very clearly. I would argue that as a leader, you know whether or not the group is focused on achieving goals, that the standards are being met, that the appropriate training is going on. In relational ones, this is you just being a visible principal. If you see that there's conflict, you manage it when it's appropriate. In the environmental ones, these are very subjective, and I think that's one of the biggest problems with them. Sometimes they're effective, sometimes they're not. So you really, for internal leadership, for goal focusing, you have to make sure that every stakeholder understands the expectations of what needs to be accomplished. We've already looked about dysfunctional people and dysfunctional performances, and especially if you're taking this course in conjunction with the supervision class, you know that this is a big topic and a big takeaway message. You have to make sure that everyone in your team is in agreement or close to agreement on what needs to be accomplished, and if there are problems, they've kind of stepped in and they've helped. The initial meeting really is where the tone is set and where you can kind of accomplish this goal. When you're looking for structuring, rule clarification is important. If you have a group of people that are leading perhaps a book study, you have to make sure that you know that who is the one that's responsible for distributing the books, who's responsible for collecting a summary of it, who's responsible for leading the lessons. That's equally important as well, and I think that's linked to accountability too. Facilitating decision making, good leaders don't run from conflict, they approach it, they hit it head on. That also is in my opinion, a big takeaway message, because if conflict can be resolved very quickly, then you won't have it. And conflict might not be a bad thing, but it's good to resolve conflict when it happens, or else you've created an enemy or problems for life, and that can be an issue. The best time to meet with a team is once in the beginning and once in the end, which is kind of your way to monitor appropriate progress. So training team members in task skills, this was sort of glossed over in the textbook. I think this is important, and I've said this in the supervision class. You do well in teams if you have an effective initial training with clear standards in place. So many times people go to these professional development sessions at the beginning of the school year and they don't have a clue what they're about, and there's nothing that you can do or I can do to change that. They're not going to have a clue what the point of the professional development session was. If the leader, the principal, the teacher leader, the coach comes in with an agenda and says, this is what we're doing in August, we're going to take these actions, you're going to work on them, in October we're following up on them, and they actually do follow up on them, you have trained the team members appropriately. They know what's going on, they understand the training, and they know what the internal and effective skills are, and I think that's a big idea. Make sure that there's a sample available that says this is going on in August, September, October, and it gives them their progress after every meeting. So anything dealing with standards of excellence is assessment. You make sure that the team goals are met, the individual progress is met, and I think as a building principal, you do this just by being visible by being present, and asking for data summary. If you do that, you're going to be more effective. So sometimes people need help understanding interpersonal skills and intrapersonal skills to accomplish goals. I think good leaders actually help people interact with each other, especially in professions like education. I've said it 100 times, this whole teachers are narcissists type of thing you have to deal with, and everybody thinks they're doing their job great. And when everybody thinks they're doing their job great, they might not understand how to interact with other people effectively. So when that happens, I view that as a potential problem as well. So that's something that you can do, and you can do to help people get along with each other so that they understand how tasks can be accomplished and what that necessarily looks like. So you have to involve all stakeholders in actions and have manageable teams. Everybody should have a say in stake. Business literature tells you all the time that an effective team has no more than 7 members. I think that's very good advice. I think you can accomplish a lot with 7. One of the things that I always used to teach my business courses is when you have a team that has even numbers, dumb move, because factions form. If you have a direct split in the middle, you as the leader are going to be making the decisions anyway, and you're trying to avoid that happening by creating the teams in the first place. But if you have a large department, split it in 2. There's no reason that you can't do it, especially those of you that are working in a social studies department. If I've learned one thing about this state, it's the fact that our social studies departments are massive, and they're teaching 10 to 20 of different subjects, and there's, we're having difficulty creating balance there. So any group's natural leaders occur, and people that are followers will occur as well. You want to assess really who the leader should be and who the follower should be. And if somebody's a follower and you think they should be a leader, you need to be involved so that their voice can be heard, and so that conflict doesn't start and conflict doesn't cause significant problems. Sometimes it resolves itself, other times you have to intervene and you have to step in to make sure that the conflict is not going to really overarch what's going on and what the team as a whole needs to accomplish. So, do you reward people for their commitment to the team goal? Yes, I think you do. You don't want to take as much of the credit and ensure that your staff gets the necessary credit. This enables buy-in and support for your leadership activities. I want to make sure that that's kind of that's kind of clear to all of you, that in this profession you need to give the credit to the teachers, and by giving the credit to the teachers, it creates this environment where the teachers are more likely to work for you versus against you. Individual needs. You're dealing with 50 different people that have 50 different visions in life as a building principal. You need to ensure that your teaching staff is supported, you're giving them personal support, and collaborative support so that they can work together and they can be successful. And that's one of your jobs as a principal. You need to support your teaching staff, and if you support your teaching staff, you're going to find more success as well. I've already talked about ethics. You have to be transparent in this profession. There's nothing else I can say about ethics that you don't already know. Being ethical and acting in an ethical manner is part of the job of being a school administrator, period. So, the external environments are problems in a lot of places. As a building principal, you have to make sure that if teachers are doing good work, it's actually recognized and people appreciate it. If you don't do that, you're wasting their time, and when you need them, they're not going to be there for you. Some of the research in Chicago public schools, which I talk about in the doc classes I teach here, really have shown that there's a huge change in urban environments that have moved to site-based management because there's more opportunity to be recognized, and they're coming up with their own initiatives, but nothing is getting done that advances the district mission, but it's advancing the building mission. And if the building mission isn't in conjunction with the district mission, everything is over your head and it's going to be a failure anyway. So you have to advocate to central administration. I think this is a very big idea, and I've worked at schools where the building principal takes all the credit and they never tell central administration what a great teacher they have. When that happens, that's a big, big problem. I always advocate for my students. If I have a student who's doing something special and moving forward on something, I want to make sure that their voice is heard and that there's a clear connection to what they're doing. But principals need to make sure that their teaching staff gets credit in central administration unit level meetings. And as a building principal, I truly believe that's your role to do. You have to secure resources for teachers through central administration. This is a big idea and big component of the finance class. If somebody goes above your head and asks for resources, you look irresponsible, you look like you don't have a clue as to what's going on. You need to facilitate with your secretary, your administrative assistant, your funds balance manager, whoever that may be, to make sure that you get what you need for your teaching staff to help with resources. Big, big idea. So there will be a ton of environmental distractions throughout the community. Teachers become worried, they lose focus. You see that really in these urban districts, but you're not going to see this in your you're not going to see this in your smaller school districts. You have the responsibility to help your principals stay the course, and if you can do that, I truly think everybody wins. Use surveys, use evaluations, use benchmarking, really show how people have succeeded or failed in meeting goals. If you have funding or resources, do it. This is more to your benefit than to involve other stakeholders in the proceedings, because when you involve other stakeholders, this really does create a bias, and we're trying to avoid that in education. We don't want to create a bias with what we're doing. So you also have to share information with your staff. When there are funding issues, you have to be transparent with your staff. In Oklahoma City a few years ago, teaching staff found out that there were going to be budget cuts, that people were going to be losing their jobs, and the leadership hadn't shared this yet. And this created this massive disconnect, and it's one of the reasons why in Oklahoma City, 1 out of every 5 principals don't stay after their first year. Don't let that be your school district. The newspaper's going to find out things, they're going to publish things, but don't let them get to it first. Can't stress that enough also. So one of the studies that looked at team excellence came out of the 80s, and it looked at excellence in professional sports and across all industries, and it gave 8 characteristics of what team leadership looks like and what team excellence is. Number 1, and we'll go through these fairly quickly, I think they're all self-explanatory. Number 1 was a clear elevating goal. The staff had to know what the end goal was so that they can say we met it or we didn't meet it. Baseball team, it's winning the World Series or having a winning record. I'm from Pittsburgh, so I've had 3 straight years of the Pirates winning. I don't know what to do with myself that that's happening. But you have to make sure that objective has been met or not met. 2, it has to be done in a results-driven structure. Education is a results-driven profession. Do not lose sight of that. Leaders have to say whether somebody's individually done something right, or if the group's done something right, and you have to have the guts to reward when necessary and also punish when necessary as well. The people that you work with have to know what they are doing. I've said this in every class I've taught here. The most important thing that a principal does, they hire the right teachers. If you don't have any control over who you hire, who's working for you, you're not going to come across as competent. You're not going to have control over their competencies either. There has to be team spirit. You have to make sure that people have an idea of what they're trying to accomplish for the good of the organization, and there is clear team spirit within the organization as well. The environment has to encourage collaboration and not competition. Your job as the principal is to demand and reward collaborative behavior when you have the autonomy to do so. That creates a more powerful and in a more positive climate. So good principals require results, review results, and reward the results. Standards of excellence should be known by all stakeholders to have something to help them measure. This has to be kept in mind, and this is something that you need to make sure is being conveyed appropriately to your staff. Teams should be given the resources that they need to be successful, and the building principal has to be the one that gives those resources. If the team is rewarded and recognized, it makes everybody feel like their contributions have been important, no matter what they've done, no matter what they've no matter what they've contributed to the team. Even the 25th man on your roster in baseball is making some sort of